Hello and welcome to Dave's Geek Stuff, and today we are going to be animating this lovely clock that I've made here with an Expresso tag. Just to show you how the clock is made, there's a disc at the bottom. If I just turn the camera off, we can have a look. There's a disc that's at the bottom that I've put this material on here that says Dave's Geek Stuff. I've got this a couple of cylinders there that are basically just covering up where the hands are. I've got the second hand in a null, and the minute hand in a null, and the hour hand in a null. The reason I put them in a null is so that if I wanted to change the hour hand for something else at a later date, I could do that and have much more complex structure and animate on the null so that it still turns in the same way. And then I've got a circle spline here, and then two cloners with a cube in each cloner, which are doing these dots, and it's an object cloner with 12 and 60 around them, and I've got the smooth rotation switched on so that you can see it better actually on the hour hour markers. Sorry, if you turn that off, they kind of go a little bit. You can see this one up here; they go a little bit out of line. Anyway, that's not what this tutorial's about. I've already built the clock, and basically I'm going to talk you through the process of making it so that it moves in time. And I've got some user data here where I can change the times, and I'm putting any time I want. So let's say I want 6, 15 and 10 seconds, and there we go. So it's the hour hand here, the minute hand here, and the second hand here, which is on 10 seconds. So let's just zero that out. So this is all done with the Expresso tag. So basically use a bit of maths and make this whole thing work. I've also included in this a multiplier, so this at the moment is running in real time. But if I do a time multiplier, let's say of 60, the minutes will now move. So you'll get a minute every second. And if I want to do 3,600, you're going to get an hour every second. So yeah, that's what we're going to do. So I'm going to start by deleting the Expresso tag. I'm going to save everything first, just in case I mess it up. Delete the Expresso tag. And also go to here, I'm going to remove all of this user data. So we're going to start with something that does not have any kind of animation at all on it. So if I wanted to manually animate this, we could put in keyframe points. So I could go to the beginning and say I want to keyframe that. Go to the end and keyframe that, and I'm going to have it 360 degrees, and then we could go to the curves, and it's actually going backwards, minus 360. You get the idea though. Yeah, we could keyframe that, and then go to the F curves and make them 0 lengthed, and then the second hand would go around, and then we could animate the clock doing it all manually if that's what we wanted to do. But if you want to make a general clock that you can use in different projects, a better way of doing it than animating it, if I delete all of that, the better way of doing it is to use an Expresso tag, so that as you move across, it will automatically move across at whatever speed you want. So the first thing I'm going to do here is go to the user data. I thought I'd removed that. Obviously I haven't. Manage user data. Remove. Remove. Okay. It's gone now. Right. So the first thing I'm going to do here is go to the user data. I'm going to add user data, and we're going to start with data type. I'm going to go for date time. I'm going to call this initial time. I suppose that could be animatable. I don't see why it would be. I'm going to leave that off for now. And you see here within our null, we've now got another tab which says user data, and it's got the initial time. And if I click this little arrow here, it will bring up a calendar and a clock. Now we only want the clock part of it. The reason I didn't just use the time is because time tends to come with frames in it, and that's a whole other ballpark. So I want a full 24-hour clock. And then we can sort of advance that on in hours and minutes, and type in seconds there, so we can have 6 seconds. So I'm just going to zero this out, and then I need to right click the clock, and I'm going to go to Cinema 4D tags and go to Expresso, which will bring up this window here. And this allows you to basically do some maths and do some calculations. It's very powerful actually what you can do with this. So I'm going to make this slightly smaller here so that I can see this section of the screen here. So we're going to keep it simple and work up. One thing that I have included here is this text spline, where you can just type whatever. Doesn't matter. And that is just so that we can do some debugging. It's a nice sort of hacky way of doing some debugging, and I'll show you what I mean. So if I load up that Expresso tag again, so I'm going to drag in the clock here. As you can see, it's made a little object of a clock. And on this red bit here, which is the output, the blue is the input and the red's the outputs, I want to go down to user data, initial time, and just go for the time. So now that will give me an output. So if I now drag in the text, you'll see why I like the text there. I can go to object properties and the actual text, and I can connect the time to the text. So you can see now it's coming up with 0. So if I now click on the clock here and we change the time, if I go forward an hour, it's giving me 0.042. And as I move forward an hour, you can see it's going up. So if I go all the way through till midnight, just before midnight, and then midnight goes back to 0. So basically this goes between 0 and 1. And the moment it reaches 1, it goes back to 0 again. That is modulo. Goes round in a clock and resets after a certain amount. We're going to be using some of that maths later on. So as you can see, that works beautifully. Now we can see what's coming out. So our input into this with the initial time is a number between 0 and 1. So really I want to get that in the format of minutes. So I want to multiply that by the amount of minutes there are in a day. So I'm going to go to the new node, I'm going to go to calculate, and I'm going to go to math. In England we say maths with an S. I actually agree with Americans though, it should be math, because people in England think that maths is short for mathematics, and mathematics is a plural word, therefore we have to put an S on the end of the abbreviation, and that's not true. Mathematics, although it ends in an S, is not a plural word, therefore math is the correct singular. But I digress. So I'm going to go from the initial time into the input there, and I'm going to connect the output to the text so we can see what's coming in here. At the moment this is just set to add, so I'm going to set this to multiply over here, and now this is going to multiply our number. At the moment it's multiplying by input 2, which we've not connected to anything, and it's just a constant down here. So 0 will be obviously not multiplying anything. Anything multiplied by 0 comes out 0. So we need to work out the number of minutes in a day. Now I do know what the amount of minutes in a day because I prepared this. But the great thing, one of the great things about Cinema 4D is you can type 3 formulas directly into the fields. So for example, I know there's 24 hours in the day and there's 60 minutes and there's 60 seconds. Earlier I said number of minutes in a day, I meant seconds in a day. So we got 24 hours, 60 minutes in an hour and 60 seconds in a minute, and that will give us the number 86,400. So now if we go back up to clock and we've connected the text to the output, the multiplier will give us a nice little multiplied number, and this is the number of minutes into the day that we're at, which is exactly what we're looking for. So now we're going to add in a floor function. Now a function is just something where you pass it a number and it gives you back another number, or you pass it a piece of text and it gives you back another text. In programming terms, it could be pass it an object and you get back another object. But this is going to be a number function, or as they call them here, float functions. So we're going to get a float function and we're going to use the floor one, which basically means it chops off the decimal point. So if you have a number like sort of 2.71, it's just going to come out as 2 because it goes to the floor. And this will make it tick and give us individual seconds. So rather than, you can see at the moment, if I advance this by say 4 seconds, we're getting individual seconds there. But when we come down to animating it and you're moving it by frames, that's going to be moving it by a 25th of a second. So what you'll end up with is 544.04 or something like that. And you don't want that. You just want to chop off the decimal place. So I'm going to connect the output to that value in and the output of that to the text. So we can see nothing will really change at the moment. It's still integer numbers, but that will come in useful later. So now let's get to animating the hands of the clock. What I need to do is drag in the nulls, the 3 nulls of the second, minute and hour hands into here. And I'm just going to put them as far over to the right as I can. Make them slightly bigger so they say hour hands, so you can actually read them. And on this, what we're doing is we are going to go for the rotation in the coordinates, and we're going for the H global rotation. On each of them, and then basically that will turn them round. But we can't just put this value here, these loads and loads of seconds, into this here. What we need to do, if we start with the seconds, is we actually need to put it through what's called a modulo function. And a modulo works a bit like a clock, and it gives you the remainder. So like when you go around the clock 12 hours and you come back to 0 again, you keep doing that. And then so if you had, say, 12 hours and you were to add on 14 hours, you're actually going to come around the clock and end up at 2. And then if you were to add another 12 hours onto those 14 hours, you're still going to come back round and end up at 2. That's how the modulo works. I'm not explaining it particularly well. I'm not a mathematician. So just look it up. Trust me, you need the modulo function for this. So if I go to new node, Expresso, calculate and math again, and down here the function we're going to use here is modulo, and I'm going to connect that output to one of the inputs, and I'm going to connect the output to the text so that we can see what's coming out, and I need to make it modulo something. So I want to know what the remainder is after all the hours and minutes and everything else have been cut down. So I'm going to just divide it by 60. So now we can see, if I go back to the clock and I move it on a minute at a time, sorry, a second at a time. If I go to 1 second, we get 1. If I go to 2 seconds, we get 2. You get the idea. Now how do we connect that up to the second hand? Well, the input in that you would expect to be in degrees, 360 degrees, and actually it's in radians. So basically there are 2 pi radians in a circle. So we need to split 2 pi radians up into 60 pieces and then multiply it by the output of this modulo. So what I need to do is multiply the output here by 2 pi over 60. So I need to add a new node, Expresso, general, calculate, math. And I need to go to multiply. And in input 2 here, I'm going to do 2 times pi. See that you can actually write pi over 60, which will give me this number here, 0.105. So I'm going to connect the output there to the first input. So it's going to multiply 0.105 with that input there. And then I'm going to connect that output to the second hand rotation. So if I position these like that, so it's got a flow all the way through, we can now see whether that works. I'm going to move this to another monitor that you can't see. And let's see if the second hand moves round. Put that back to 0. 1. Ah, it's moving in the wrong direction. It's probably the way I've set the scene up, and I remember doing that earlier. So actually this multiply here, I'm just going to make that a negative. And then that way, it goes round the right way. Bit of a cheat, but there you go. See, that's 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. Beautiful. That's exactly what we're looking for. Okay, right. Well, we've got our seconds, and we've put it through the modulo, and we've got out our second hand. Now, how are we going to do the minute hand and the hour hand? Pretty similar, but we need to do a couple of multiplications on it. So let's get the text out the way for the moment. I'm going to add another node here. I'm going to go to calculate. I'm going to go to math again, and we're going to do a division this time, not a multiplication. We're going to do a division because the output here is the number of seconds, but realistically what I'm interested in on the minute hand is the number of minutes. So I'm going to divide that by 60. And then that will give us the number of minutes. And then we need another math modulo. So I'm just going to hold down control and drag that across. We're going to put the output of that to that input. And then this input here for the modulo will be 60 again, which just happens to be right because there's 60 minutes in an hour, the same as there's 60 seconds in a minute. So I'm going to then do this math multiply for the radians. So let's just copy another one of those. This is going to get very messy, but I'm going to try and keep it as clean as possible. I'm going to put the output to that multiply, which does it by the minus 0.105 again, and that output to the minute hand for the global rotation. So let's see whether, as I advance it by a minute, whether that starts to now work. Oh yes, absolutely beautiful. Let's go back to the 0 point there. There's something going wrong with that second hand. I think that's a rounding error. Maybe we'll come back to that. Maybe we won't. I think when it actually plays smoothly, that will disappear with the frames. But yeah, the minute is moving along and the second moves along. If I go to 9, that does move it along a second. Yeah, I'm sure that will all come out in the wash. Right, so now the hour hand, moving on. Now I could go from the amount of seconds and then do another division by 60 times and then do another division by 24, but there's no point because we've already done this part of the calculation here. So if I just create another divide here and then I feed the output of this this number of minutes into there, and then I want to divide this by 24 because we're getting the number of hours now. And then again, I want to do the multiplication for the radians. But this time is going to be different because this was the 2 pi. So that was minus 2 times pi over 60 for the minutes. But this time it's actually going to be over 12. So we get minus 0.524. I've just realised what we haven't done is put in the modulo, which I also need to do. So I need to put the output of that into there and the output of that into there. So the modulo for this is going to be 12 because that's the number of steps in the clock. So let's see whether that works. As I go here, if I advance an hour, in fact I'm just going to take it back to 0. Oh, that's not working at all. Okay, so I've really screwed something up there. So if I go to the clock and it's 06, this should be giving me 6 up here. So maybe I've got this divide wrong. I needed to divide it by 60, of course, because I divided it by 60 to get the number of minutes, because there's 60 seconds in a minute, and then I need to divide it by 60 to get the number of hours, because there's 60 minutes in an hour. Of course, I did this earlier. I'm just being slightly brain dead. Talking and doing it at the same time is not the most efficient way of doing things. Okay, well, we've solved that bug. So that's that. And then I go into there, do the modulo of 12, and then I multiply by the amount that gives us 12 increments. And then that goes to the hour hand. So if I now shut this down here, that's pointing at 6. So we'll go 6. It moves along an hour at a time. Now this second and minute hand messing around again, I think that's a rounding error that will come out in the wash, or we can sort out at a later date. Moving on. So what happens if I want to move across here and change the time so we hit play and it actually moves? So I need to add some seconds as this moves across. I need to add the seconds based on the frames and everything like that to the initial time. So I want to know what frame we're at. So we're going to go to new node. I'm going to general. I'm going to go to time. So let's see what output comes out of the time. Again, connecting it to the text. So as I move across, it's giving us time in seconds. So I want to add that to this initial time here. And you see this is where the decimals, I think we're going to lose some of those rounding errors. So I need to go to new node, Expresso, calculate, math. And this is going to add. I'm leaving it on the default setting, and this is going to add. So we're actually, what we're going to do is the output here, which gives us the number of seconds. I'm going to connect to the input there, connect the input, the time, to there as well. And then I'm going to connect that output to there, so we're getting the floor function. So let's recap. This is all starting to get a bit confusing. The initial time goes in here, and it gets multiplied up by 86,400 to work out the number of seconds. And then I've got the time of the timeline here, which is coming in seconds as a decimal number. And I'm adding those two together and then putting them through the floor function, so it cuts off the decimal places. And then I've got a modulo here of 60 to find out the number of seconds that are offset from the time. And then I multiply that by minus 0.105. The minus is to change direction of the hand moving round. And the 0.105 bit is it's basically a 60th of a radian. and then that goes into the second hand. And then this floor function then goes down to here. We divide it by 60 to get the number of minutes. Put that through a modulo. If I move that out there, you can see that then goes to the modulo of 60. And then we multiply again for the radians, and then that goes to the minute hand. And then the output of this here, which is the number of minutes, goes to here, where we divide again by 60 to get the number of hours. That then goes to the modulo, which is 12 this time, because that's the number of hours in a clock face. And then here we do the multiplication, which is different, and that's 12 segments of 12 divisions of 2 pi, which is the number of radians you need, and that's connected to the hour hand. So as I move across now, that is now moving the clock. And you can see the floor function keeps it moving in discrete movements. If we delete the float function that floors it, and I just, instead of deleting it, I'm just going to connect that input to that, that output to that, and that output to that. So at the moment, the float is taking it out of the equation. You can see it actually goes round smoothly now. Whereas if I connect the output of that to there, and the output of that to there, you can see it now starts to go round in a quantized manner. And that's actually a really good visual representation of the floor function. So let's move on to the next and final bit of this. Is I want to be able to speed this up. Let's say we're doing an animation, we want the clock to run really fast. So we want to go back to our user data and add in another parameter, which I'm just going to call multiplier. I'll call it time multiplier because that's what I did on my other one. It's not a percentage. I don't know why I pressed enter. Time multiplier needs to be a float that's a real number. Minimum, maximum, I actually don't want a maximum or a minimum. The default value is 1, and we can say have it go up in increments of 0.01. So there we go. That's actually going to be quite annoying, having it going up in increments of 0.01. So let's have it go up in increments of 1 for now. I mean, you can change that. That's there we go. So that moves up and down like that. So if we set that to 1 at the moment, get back our Expresso tag. Up here where we've got the initial time, I also now want to add the time multiplier. Basically, we're going to multiply the time that's coming off the timeline here before we add it. So I need to add in another node. So I'll go to math here again and go to multiply. And all the time that this time multiplier is just 1, it's not going to do anything, because 1 multiplied by anything does nothing of any interest. But we can multiply it a little bit more if we want to. We can have it running at twice the speed, or 3 times the speed, or 1,000 times the speed. So this is it working at normal time. And then we go to clock here and do time multiplier, say 10 times. And now that's going to go 10 times faster. You see some of those rounding errors have disappeared now. 60 times the speed, so that's running at 1 minute every second. 3,600 times the speed will be 1 hour every second. Back to 1. And it's in real time. And if I change the initial time to, let's say, 6, 15 and 18 seconds, and I want a time multiplier of 4, up it to 18, time multiplier of 18. You can see that works at any point. I can hit play and render it out. So I hope you've learned something. I know I did in preparing this. And I'll see you in another video. Subscribe, like, hit the bell icon, all that other stuff. Share it amongst your friends. That's the most important thing. And liking it for the YouTube algorithms. I don't know what I'm talking about. Anyway, I'll see you in another video.